There's been a lot of buzz recently around United Oil and Gas and offshore exploration in Jamaica. The discussion has made its way into mainstream media where economists, lawyers, and policymakers all seem to have an opinion. Some, including the Minister of Energy, have expressed cautious optimism. Others argue Jamaica shouldn't pursue oil exploration at all, often pointing to concerns like the resource curse and the environmental challenges. And on social media, you'll even see claims that drilling is causing earthquakes, many of which leave out important scientific context. I've addressed some of those misconceptions before, but today I want to approach this from a different angle. I want to talk about the geology, but more specifically, I want to step back from the modern debate and look at something that's often overlooked: the history of oil and gas exploration in Jamaica. Because while many people think exploration started in the 1950s or 1970s with the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica, or more recently with companies like United Oil and Gas, the story actually goes back much farther. It begins in the 1800s when early geologists first recorded signs in Jamaica's landscape that hinted at hydrocarbons beneath the surface, long before modern exploration ever began. So today, we're going to trace that story from early geological observations in the 19th century to modern studies that suggest Jamaica may sit above a far more significant petroleum system than most people realize. This is not an exhaustive list, however, and there may be parts of the history I left out, but still, if anyone watches this who is a little more in tune with the history of oil and gas exploration in Jamaica, or may be more familiar with a part of the history I didn't touch on, feel free to share that. So, while preparing for this video, I came across an old Gleaner article from 2007. It was a letter to the editor written by Professor Simon Mitchell, Professor of Sedimentary Geology at the University of the West Indies. I'll link it in the description. In the letter, Professor Mitchell pointed out some inaccuracies in a previously published Gleaner article about the famous firewater attraction at Windsor St. Anne, and clarified aspects of the historical record surrounding it. More importantly, the article highlights how this spring helped inspire and continues to inspire Jamaica's long-standing interest in oil and gas exploration. The letter outlines a fascinating history. The Windsor Spring was first scientifically recorded in 1869 by the British geologist James G. Sawkins in the Reports on the Geology of Jamaica, based on field observations made in 1865. Now, it is important to note that while Sawkins documented and described the spring, he likely did not discover it in the true sense of the word. He was probably led there by local residents, meaning that the spring was almost certainly already known to communities in the area long before it entered the scientific literature. Later now, in 1881, J.C. Filippo discussed the Windsor Spring in the Mineral Springs of Jamaica and promoted its supposed medicinal properties. Now, when I first saw the name J.C. Filippo, I initially wondered whether this is the same Filippo connected to Filippo Baptist Church in Spanish Town. You know, James Filippo, the English Baptist missionary known for campaigning against slavery in Jamaica. But after doing some additional checking, it appears that James Cecil Filippo was actually a different person entirely. I couldn't find a photograph of James Cecil Filippo, so if there are any history buffs watching this, feel free to let me know in the comments if you have any further information. The scientific importance of the Windsor Spring became even clearer in 1924 when government geologist Charles Matley formally documented gas bubbles escaping from the springs. Matley analyzed the gas chemically and found that it contained approximately 98% methane, while other hydrocarbons and carbon dioxide also exist. Now, that detail is extremely important. The presence of hydrocarbons beyond methane suggests that the gas may have been associated with deeper petroleum systems beneath Jamaica rather than simply being like shallow swamp gas. In other words, this was one of the earliest scientific clues that Jamaica might possess active hydrocarbon systems. Professor Mitchell's letter further notes that Matley's report was explicitly tied to petroleum exploration. The title of the report itself was Report on the Mineral Spring at Windsor St. Anne and the Probability of the Occurrence of Petroleum in its Neighborhood. That title alone tells us that by the early 20th century, geologists were already seriously considering the possibility of petroleum in Jamaica. The letter also explains that Jamaica's first oil exploration well was drilled in 1955. Interestingly, the original plan had been to drill near Windsor itself, but access difficulties caused the well to be located somewhere near Negril instead. Later, an exploration well at Windsor reached a depth of about 12,820 feet, making it the deepest onshore well in Jamaica drilled at the time, although no commercial oil was discovered or made. Eventually, exploration interest shifted more heavily towards offshore regions such as the Walton Basin. Now, if you want to learn more about some of the early geologists in Jamaica, there are a few excellent resources out there. One is a paper by Stephen K. Donovan titled Pioneers of Jamaican Geology and the Jamaica Group of Geologists Association, 1955 to 1959. And then there's this book I am currently reading entitled Jamaican Rock Stars, 1823 to 1971, The Geologists Who Explored Jamaica. It contains detailed accounts of many of the early geologists who worked on the island, and the history is generally fascinating. I'll probably talk about it more in future videos. But all the references aside, what becomes very clear is this. Jamaica's interest in oil and gas did not suddenly begin in the 1950s. Yes, exploration became more formalized during the 1950s and 60s, but the foundations were laid much earlier through the work of generations of geologists, field scientists, and researchers who did observations, and they shaped everything that followed. And those early studies should never be taken for granted. Now, while the Windsor gas seep is by far the most famous and widely discussed seep in Jamaica, it is not the only one that has been reported over the years. In 2016, the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica, in partnership with CGG Geoconsulting, identified 2 live onshore oil seeps in Jamaica. Then in February 2017, Tullow Oil reported that there was a discovery of Jamaica's first offshore live oil seep. One of the more recent onshore seeps to gain public attention was reported in 2019 when a woman in St. Mary discovered oil-like material on her property. The story was covered extensively by local media including the Jamaica Gleaner, the Jamaica Observer, and Jamaica Star. However, despite the excitement surrounding the discovery, the seep was ultimately not considered economically viable. And that distinction is important. The existence of oil or gas seeps does not automatically mean that commercially recoverable quantities of hydrocarbons are present. A seep simply indicates that hydrocarbons have been generated somewhere within the subsurface and have migrated toward the surface. Whether that translates into an economically productive reservoir or it's an entirely different question altogether. Still, from a geological perspective, these seeps are significant. In the academic literature, Professor Simon Mitchell notes in his paper Out of Many One, The Story of Jamaica's Geology, that it turns out that 3 sets of oil samples from Jamaica found in the parishes of St. Anne, St. Mary, and St. Thomas are Jurassic oils and match similar oils from Belize and the Gulf of Mexico. End quote. Now, that is a remarkable statement because it suggests that at least some hydrocarbons found in Jamaica may have geological origins or characteristics within petroleum systems elsewhere in the wider Caribbean and Gulf regions. So when you step back and look at the broader picture, it becomes clear that research, exploration, and new discoveries related to hydrocarbons in Jamaica have been ongoing for well over a century, continuing far beyond those earliest geological observations recorded in the 1800s. Now, let's talk about Dr. Raymond Wright. If anyone ever writes an article about the history of oil and gas in Jamaica or mentions that history in any serious way, and this man isn't mentioned, then they probably did not look into it thoroughly enough. He's a key figure in the story. In preparing for this video, I pulled from 3 sources, all of which I will link in the description below. The first is a Jamaica Observer article published in 2006 titled A Geological Giant and Pulse of the PCJ. The second is sadly his obituary, written by Professor Edward Robinson, Dr. Gavin Gunter, and Professor Simon Mitchell, published in the Caribbean Journal of Earth Sciences in 2012. And the third is a Jamaica Gleaner article published around the time of his death. Now, Dr. Wright was an interesting character. I never met him personally, but based on how he is described, he seems to have been a person of tremendous discipline, intellect, and work ethic. In an interview with the Jamaica Observer, he once said, and I quote, "Maybe in large measure, if I were to review my life, I have been a frustrated academic. That's probably the best way to describe it," end quote. And honestly, when you look at his life and career, you can clearly see that academic spirit throughout everything he did. He was born in Southfield, St. Elizabeth in 1940. His interest in geology began at a very young age after reading a book titled Geology in the Service of Man when he was around 9 years old. By age 11, he already knew he wanted to become a geologist. He later attended Clarendon College, where geology had been introduced into the curriculum, and he excelled at it. In 1963, Dr. Wright earned a BSc in geology with a minor in zoology from the University of Durham in England and a Jamaican government scholarship. He then completed a Master of Science in Micropaleontology at the University College London in 1964 under a British Council scholarship before returning to Jamaica and joining the Geological Survey of Jamaica that same year, studying water resources at what would eventually become the Water Resources Authority. By 1973, at only 33 years old, he became Jamaica's Commissioner of Mines, directing the combined Geological Survey and Mining Departments, what is now called the Mines and Geology Division. He completed his PhD in 1976, and his thesis was entitled Aspects of the Geology of Tertiary Limestone in West Central Jamaica, West Indies. Now, this is where the story begins, connecting directly to oil and gas in Jamaica. During the 1970s oil crisis, the global oil prices started rising dramatically, and he became deeply involved in renewed efforts to search for petroleum resources in Jamaica. He worked with industry consultants to prepare and promote Jamaica's petroleum prospects internationally, while also reviewing the island's geology and previous drilling efforts. These efforts eventually contributed to the establishment of what became the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica, or PCJ, in 1979, where Wright served as the Director of Exploration. Under this renewed exploration push during the early 1980s, several important wells were drilled or deepened, including Hartford, Retreat, Windsor, and offshore Arawak wells. But what is especially interesting about Dr. Wright is that he was not solely focused on oil and gas. He also understood the need for energy diversification and became a major advocate for alternative energy in Jamaica. In 1994, he became group managing director of the PCJ, a role he held until 2005 when he retired. And during that period, he was instrumental in the establishment of the Wigton wind farm in Manchester, which was completed in 2004. Interestingly, that same year, he also helped influence the reinitiation of offshore hydrocarbon exploration using updated exploration techniques. So, at the same time that he was supporting renewable energy development, he was also helping to advance oil and gas exploration. He clearly saw energy security as something requiring multiple approaches. So Tullow Oil became involved in Jamaica's offshore sector through the Walton Morant Basin, a massive offshore block covering approximately 22,400 square kilometers south of the island. Operating under a production sharing agreement with the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica, Tullow conducted extensive exploration activities between 2014 and 2019 in an effort to determine whether commercially viable hydrocarbons existed offshore. And I think many Jamaicans have already forgotten about Tullow Oil, even though it really wasn't that long ago that they were operating in Jamaican waters. During its time in Jamaica, the company carried out a series of technical studies and surveys designed to better understand the geology of the basin. And these included bathymetric studies as well as 2D and 3D seismic studies, and Tullow spent millions of US dollars collecting and processing offshore seismic data in order to map subsurface structures that might contain oil and gas accumulations. At the time, there was genuine excitement surrounding the Walton Morant Basin because of its geological similarities to productive petroleum systems elsewhere in the Caribbean and even northern South America. Tullow's exploration program significantly expanded the amount of geological and geophysical data available for Jamaica's offshore region and helped modernize the understanding of Jamaica's petroleum potential in that basin. And in August 2020, Tullow transferred 80% operating stake and operationship to United Oil and Gas. Following the transaction, United Oil and Gas assumed full ownership and control of the license area and continued evaluating the basin's hydrocarbon potential. And unlike Tullow, which operated Jamaica as one part of a larger international portfolio, United Oil and Gas viewed Jamaica as a potentially transformational exploration opportunity and continued promoting the basin's multi-billion-dollar potential to investors and industry observers. So while Tullow Oil ultimately exited Jamaica without making a commercial discovery, the company still played a major role in advancing the modern understanding of Jamaica's offshore petroleum geology. Their seismic surveys and technical evaluation laid much of the groundwork for the exploration efforts that followed under United Oil and Gas. Which brings us to where things stand today. There has been a great deal of discussion surrounding United Oil and Gas, both in conventional media and across social media. And from what I have observed over the years following oil and gas developments, and from the little bit I know personally, this is probably the most optimistic the public rhetoric around Jamaican oil exploration has ever sounded. It never quite felt like this, when Tullow Oil was here. As of the recording of this video, United Oil and Gas reported that piston core samples collected offshore in Jamaica were sent to the United States for geochemical analysis, and according to the company, the analysis successfully identified C4 and C5 hydrocarbons, including butanes and pentanes, within select core samples. From what I've gathered so far, the company is now using the piston core and heat flow data to further de-risk the basin while progressing commercial decisions and discussions to potential future drilling operations. Current indicators suggest that exploratory drilling may begin around 2027 or early 2028. So at least for now, this is where Jamaica's offshore oil and gas story stands. So after reviewing the available literature and sources I could find online, I compiled the following timeline. So 1865, Sawkins conducts geological observations at Windsor Spring during fieldwork in Jamaica. 1869, hydrocarbon potential at Windsor Spring is formally documented by Sawkins in his published geological reports. 1881, J.C. Philippo publishes the Mineral Springs of Jamaica, noting the springs' properties and potential significance. 1924, C.A. Matley documents significant methane emissions at Windsor Spring, including a detailed chemical analysis of the gas. 1955, Jamaica's first oil exploration well is drilled near the Grill. 1979, the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica is established. 1982, the Windsor 1 exploration well is drilled, reaching depths of over 12,800 feet. 1994, Dr. Raymond Wright becomes Group Managing Director of PCJ. 2004, the Wigton Wind Farm is commissioned, marking a major step in energy diversification. And offshore exploration efforts also begin in the same year. 2014 to 2019, now Tullow Oil conducts offshore exploration in the Walton Morant Basin. 2017, reports emerge of Jamaica's first documented offshore live oil seep. 2020, the offshore license is transferred from Tullow Oil to United Oil and Gas. And between 2024 to 2026, United Oil and Gas reports the identification of hydrocarbons offshore from core samples, suggesting an active petroleum system. And this is not a complete historical record, and I acknowledge there may be some gaps or omissions in this timeline. If anyone has additional verified information from academic or industrial or primary sources, I would genuinely welcome those contributions. There is a substantial body of literature on oil and gas exploration in Jamaica, and while this summary is not exhaustive, I believe it provides a solid overview of the key milestones in the country's oil exploration history. So there you have it, a history of oil and gas exploration in Jamaica. I thought it was important that amid the current excitement and fanfare around United Oil and Gas, we take the time to look back at the broader historical context. From what I've seen, much of what circulates on social media and even in conventional media doesn't fully capture key aspects of this history. Even with my attempt here, I would not consider this account exhaustive. There is still a great deal of material out there, from books I have yet to consult, to scientific journals, to documents held in libraries and archives. And while there is certainly a lot of available information online, many valuable reports remain tucked away in archives both in Jamaica and abroad, waiting to be fully explored. At any rate, I hope you found value in this overview and in my attempt to document this history here on YouTube. Until next time, goodbye for now and take care.